各位观众朋友们，大家好，欢迎再一次收看我们 J 与 J 论坛。我们的好朋友、老朋友 Jim Noe 跟我们一起来聊一聊。我们这2个礼拜没有见面了。How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. We survived last week. The Houston collision last week, the Houston calamity, and now everybody is recovering and rebuilding.
I was telling our audience in Chinese that this is the first time we did not tape for 2 weeks. And there are 2 weeks, there's major developments. First was Lunar New Year. We didn't get a chance to say Happy New Year to anyone.
Yeah, it's actually been 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't. It's 3 weeks since we've been on, and then the second week it was this devastation from last week. 我再次想再跟我们的观众预祝大家为大家祈福跟集福气，因为我不晓得各位的情况怎么样。I was telling our audience, a lot of us, our audience here in Houston, some of them are still recovering, some of them might not recover. Yeah. I hope they're okay. We'll be praying for them. We'll keep them in our prayers.
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, I think most people, most businesses, most things will recover, but there is some permanent damage that some people will never recover from.
A lot of our audience, immigrants, they buy houses in cash, or once they pay up their mortgage, they cease to continue to pay insurance. So a lot of these damages, they will not be able to recover. This I know for a fact. Yeah. And it's a shame because insurance is such a big part of your risk management. People don't realize the importance of it until you need it. I get it. This is once in a 200-year event, but we've been getting a lot of these. Have you noticed in the last 20 years? 100-year floods, 100-year storms, 100-year pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because the concept of insurance or the lack of it is a major structural flaw that in part, it's only a part, but it is an important part that led to the problem last week.
Could you explain further to our audience what you mean by that?
Yes. Part of the way that the ERCOT grid relative to the producers of the electricity was created is to always have just-in-time pricing of energy sources. And when things are in stable conditions or within certain limits, not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, then everything operates very efficiently. But when it gets outside, like it did last week for cold, or like California gets outside in the heat of the summer, the system breaks down. And people say, well, the reason for the fault last week is because it went outside the design limits. But that's precisely why you need to buy an insurance policy. And that's precisely why you need the regulators and the people who structured the system need to pay people to take the risk of coming in when the situation gets outside the limits. That's precisely why you have insurance, to cover things that you cannot predict. Now, people said, well, it would cost money to have those producers winterize their facilities, be available to jump in when the others cannot produce. But that's the cost of providing insurance. Is it formally an insurance policy legally? No, it's not. It's the economic equivalent of insurance. And it's one of the versions that says you never know how weak you are until pressure comes on you, or you never know how strong you are until you're tested. My son is a Marine, and one of the most important concepts of Marine training is you must find your limits. And in training, they test everyone. They know everybody has finite limits. Some are stronger than others, but ultimately everybody has finite limits, and they keep pushing you until you find your limits and go beyond them. And that's what needed to happen. That's kind of part two of what the problem is. Part one was we had a similar situation 10 years ago in 2011. And the system failed in virtually the same way that it did last week. And they went after that, and the legislature, the regulators, everybody went and did a huge series of analyses and evaluations, came up with reports, and they knew just what to do. But they didn't do it. The regulators and the legislators went to sleep. Nobody prepared for this storm. It's one thing to make a mistake. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This is a shame on our elected and appointed leaders. A lot of public harm was created last week, in my view, in hindsight, that was unnecessary. It could have been addressed. This is human error.
I love the fact that you could go above and beyond and use human life as the first criteria. Before we started recording, I said that I'm sad and ashamed that in a developed country that this could happen. I told you I was driving around seeing people starving, people waiting in line for water and food. We see a lot of organic. It shows the good and the bad. The good folks of Houston, Maya Shea, Jinu, just organically sending food out on food trucks, frantically to feed folks. People are dying from the cold and from starvation. We will not see the death toll until at least 3 months later from hypothermia and from death. I mean, I looked this up. I researched this, knowing that it's hard to calculate. Now, the fact that you're calling these folks out matters because that is above party line. Because when this happened, immediately the blaming starts. It's because the new Green Deal. It's because the wind turbines doesn't work. It's everybody else's fault but theirs. And the fact that these political appointees are gambling with people's lives and taxpayer money. You said insurance. They will not do it. Why? Because they're insuring something that is not their own. They don't insure Texans' lives. We're proud to be Texans because we're independent. We look down on, let's say, California and New York for their high tax rates. And 20 years ago, when this was deregulated, first of all, disclosure, I'm more familiar with energy market than most because my wife has been in the industry for 20 years.
Okay.
She has no sights on this. She told me that you cannot get the cake and eat. You have the cake and eat the cherry. You cannot complain about low rates. By the way, the last week reports that came out, we have not been paying lower rates. The only person that profited from this are the corporations and companies that have been appointed, that gets exclusive rights, that has a quid pro quo with our elected officials. I donate money to you to help you get elected. You appoint me to ERCOT, or you give me the contract. Let me be one of the deregulated power companies. A very small amount of people profited greatly from the demise and lives of these folks for the last 20 years. They knew this would happen. In Alaska and in the north, it gets a lot colder than this, but yet electricity doesn't stop. I understand this in 2011, this happened too. They had to do it, but they're not going to put, they don't want, it's profit driven. When you let public services be run and controlled by private corporations whose bottom line is about their balance sheet, that's not going to work. That is just not going to work. We need elected officials like you that understands that you have a duty to citizens to provide the necessity to taxpayers. We cannot have quid pro quo to benefit only the few. This state doesn't have balance for a long time. The legislature, the governors are all one party. The other party has no say in here until the cities recently, the last few elections in the cities. But this is completely about the state. It's from the legislature.
This is the state.
ERCOT is appointed by one party. So to me, the same problems happen in New York. To me, I don't care what party affiliated you are with. You make a mistake like this, you need to go. Somebody needs to be responsible. People call me out and said, "What is not about politics," but it is because we elected these folks.
Yeah, the first responsibility of a public elected official,
a public servant,
as a public servant, is to keep us safe. And there's a lot of definition of safe The first is physically safe. Okay, well, people froze to death. That's not physically safe. Financially safe. A lot of people lost a lot of money. Okay, and the other side of it is, while some of the corporations involved, the producers made a bunch of money, the costs of this calamity last week were pushed not onto the government itself, not under the state government, but to homeowners, to private businesses, to individuals. And they're all different kinds of costs. Money costs, of course, but human costs. People dying, people getting injured, emotion, people having mental reactions. It's very, very unequal, and it needs to change. What you say about the appointments is exactly right. I'm very disappointed in our governor, because the first thing that happened, he started pointing fingers. And many of the things that he says are absolutely correct. But we were not prepared for them. And we were not prepared because he exercised appointment power for the people on the Public Utilities Commission, who in turn appointed the directors of ERCOT, who in turn appointed the management of ERCOT. So at the top of the pyramid was the governor, is the governor.
I truly appreciate you for saying this, because instead of pointing fingers, all he had to do was take responsibility. Instead of playing political games, but they did not. And the fact is, they resigned. Some of the board members resigned because they don't even live in the state. If you see their salaries, they're making $600,000-$700,000 a year doing what? And very importantly is, do you know how much rebates they get? How much money that's not on the table from these power providers that want to gain their favor or that want to have exclusive in a certain area? Mm-hmm. Jim, what you said is key, is that earlier, is that it's a human error. Mm-hmm. This is avoidable. Natural disasters is not, but this is avoidable. And it was not.
And there's another aspect of this, Jimmy, that nobody's talking about, that I think is extremely important as well. And
which is?
And that is public communication. And there's three dimensions. There's at least three dimensions of inadequate public commitment. Number one, during good times, I was not aware of the frailty of this structure. I was not aware of the risks that people are taking here, that all of us, or citizens, are taking. There was no disclosure by the governor's office, by the ERCOT board. No one has told us about this. We had every reason to believe that that insurance policy, that the 2011 recommendations were in fact put in place, et cetera. So nobody knew the risk we were taking. Number two, nobody warned anybody last week. They knew the weather was coming, but nobody said, be careful, get out of town, take care of your vulnerable family members. Nobody said anything about this. And now it's coming out, number three, that we were perilously close to having the entire system shut down or blow up.
For weeks.
And no one talked about that even during the calamity. And it makes you wonder who was watching the store. It is beyond belief. We have taken risks that we don't understand. And we put a great deal of, we put a great deal of faith in our government officials. And this is political malpractice. Political malpractice.
Oh, my Lord. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Because there's so many so-called conservatives, defenders of Abbott and the GOP in Texas, that refuses to be honest, that this is a political failure, that we have not had the right check and balances in the state for too long. We could have, we're the only state in the nation that is not connected to the eastern or western grid. We're the only state. Even El Paso as a city refused, and they were fine. We're the only state that claims to deregulate so we could save money. The sad thing is, everybody's doing analysis now, finally, after 20 years. We've been paying more than other states, and yet we are not getting the service. That profit, that hedge, is pocketed by the middlemen and return it to these politicians. Look, our system, our country, you said the public faith, the erosion of public faith in our government is something that you cannot get back. We become a banana republic or a third world country when you start distrusting the government. We did not grow up in a country like this. My fear and my sadness is attackers of our democracy, attackers for state. Just give them even more ammo to say, look, democracy doesn't work. Look at Texas. This Texas conservative, it doesn't work. We need to have check and balances, and we haven't. And no one wants to take responsibility. Paxton and Abbott, for the last 4 years, they're playing these games just to win votes, to stay in office, stay in power. They forgot about integrity. They forgot about responsibility, about being a public servant. They forgot what would happen with the legacy when people are dead. I told you before the show recorded, I'm very, very worked up, and I see your passion in this too. My friends died. All three of his kids and his ex-wife and the mother died in a house fire. This is news everywhere. This is 2 miles from my house. This didn't have to happen.
It didn't.
I'm not saying it's an era.
It didn't have to happen. And one of the prices is yet to be paid. Texas in general, and Houston in particular, Dallas as well, has grown over the years by people moving here from elsewhere in the United States. Now it's California. A generation ago, it was people from New York and the Northeast, and people from abroad. Because this is the second major disaster that we've had. The first one was Hurricane Harvey, which also, in my opinion, was mostly preventable. We couldn't control the rain that came down, but we could control what happened to the rain when it hit the ground. And we didn't take precautions on that. And so what is happening is Houston no longer enjoys relocations of people coming from other parts of the country. We have a little bit, but nowhere near what we used to have. And I believe that this most recent thing last week, if anybody was thinking of coming to Houston or to Texas, it's going to give them pause before coming again.
And that's my point I was making.
Take care. Look, we're the energy capital of the world. And if we can't manage our own most important business, what can we do well? And like you said a moment ago, our weather was cold last week. There's no question it was unseasonably cold, everything else. But that temperature is not unusual for Minneapolis, for Boston, Chicago, other parts of the country, Chicago, Denver. People manage that. We just did not take the care to go outside of our limits. And
I hear it. I feel it, Jim. We have empathy, and I see the people around us. These are our neighbors. These are our friends. People are dying. People are starving, and it didn't have to happen. Me and you are lucky. We got out, on scat. I mean, I didn't lose power or water. We're lucky. We prepared, but this is not about how much we're prepared. You can't prepare for this. You cannot. Yeah, as a normal citizen, you cannot. We cannot be like Ted Cruz to fly out to Cancun for vacation. I wish we could, and we have to stay here. My mother's house is completely trashed because the water pipe broke above her garage. My neighbors, we all try to help each other. I had a neighbor come in. I gave him butane gas canisters. He helped me shut down the water valve. We did this. We help, but that's us, Estonians and Texans. But our government is not doing that. And if what you say could be shared by the majority of Texans, this would not happen. But there is Texans who believes that, hey, it doesn't matter. It's always the other party's fault. It's always the liberals, the Democrats, or the Green Party, or because of renewables. Instead of shifting blame first, accusing first, reflect and take responsibility. So ensure this won't happen again. Mm-hmm. Because it will. It will, because of political infighting.
Well, if it's not this issue, it's something else. And my stint in government, and it's been twice, the little bit of background there, I have seen structural flaws in many, many other things. Public safety, for instance, police and fire contracts. public finance, we have weaknesses almost everywhere. And politicians don't want to deal with them. Instead of taking responsibility like they did a generation or two ago, what they do is continue to pander to voters by giving them more and more and more. And basically, they're buying loyalty. And it's a very short-term transactional relationship, and respect for the system has gone way down at the same time as the expectation for the system is going way up. We have more and more people dependent upon the government for various things than we ever have had before, at the very time that the government is less and less capable of delivering. It's a paradox, and other things are going to break. It just is. And we're in dangerous territory now. Last week, was bad as it was a wake-up call for other things to do.
Jim, everything you said is, it's very rare we completely 100% agree and have the same thoughts. It's rare because everything you said is how I feel. This anger, this frustration, but politicians, our elected leaders, are mortgaging our future and passing the buck down to the next administration. They pander to their voters. They use the public funds to make themselves look good, to do vanity projects, to benefit the few. But our infrastructure is failing. 30 years ago, we had the best roads, the best system. Everyone wanted to immigrate here. And you said about Houston immigration, about people coming here, that trickle-down effect won't be felt for maybe the next decade or so. Tax rates, tax income will get lower. They're so short-sighted. How could we claim to be the great state of Texas, independent, and we don't want to deal with the federal government because hooked up with the Eastern or Western grid? We don't trust the feds. And this happens? No, we don't trust the politicians here. And Jim, and to be honest with you, we already know what's going to happen next election or after. Whether the GOP likes it or not, the demographics of the voters are changing. The cities are now all solidly, let's say, blue. With the Latino population, with immigrant population, the hardcore right-wingers, no matter what you do, you're going to lose power. But instead of trying to understand what the majority is thinking, because as a party, you want to represent the majority, right? Instead of doing that, they're holding on. They're drawing a line in the sand and holding on to whatever it is that they want to hold on to. But then, do I want to see a state or a country where one party does it all? That's not going to work. There will be no checks and balances. No matter what party is in it, absolute power equals absolute corruption.
Look at it. Let's make your point in the other way. Look what happened in New York.
Yeah,
look what happened with Cuomo. And that's life and death too.
He needs to go. But the one thing I give to the New York elected officials, for example, AOC, they call him out and say he needs to go. There's no party line. There's no defending each other. He did something wrong. He needs to go. California, Newsom needs to go too.
And the new, she's not so new anymore, Letitia James, who's the Attorney General for the state of New York. She's a very liberal Democrat. She's calling out Cuomo too.
He needs to go. He made a massive mistake. He was caught lying. Look, these career politicians, there needs to be some accountability. Jim, you have some, the kind of elected officials I personally would like to see. And I'm not saying this because you're my friend. Look, you have to have some kind of success in the private sector to know what real human beings are like. Yeah. Because your whole life, you have a silver spoon. Your daddy is a politician. Or if you came from a trust fund and you became a leader of men, a public servant, how would you know what real life is like? You've had success in the private sector and in the public sector. And you did your job. You were elected, you were appointed, but you did your job. You did what was best for all, not just to pander to a party. No. But yet that's not what, those are not the people they want anymore. They want you to have loyalty and to absolutely like a cult. That's not who you are. Look past party affiliations. We have to start doing that. We have to start taking accountability. And
let me mention one other thing. There's a very famous book called The Fifth Risk that was written by a man about 5 years ago named Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is famous for Buckyball, Moneyball, pardon me, The Blind Side, several other various books. But what he did was he got so concerned about the transition between the Obama administration and the Trump administration in 2016 and 17 that he went to Washington and he talked to the people in the national security. And he said, what are our risks? And they said, well, the first risk is Russia and China. The next risk is North Korea. The next risk, number 3, is Iran. He said, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. And they said, we're not done yet. And he said, okay, what's the 4th risk? And he said, the 4th risk is we don't know what we don't know. Are we going to have another Ebola crisis? Are we going to have another El Nino? What are we going to have? Are we going to have climate change and flooding? And he said, wow, boy, I'm glad you mentioned that. Now we got to figure out how to buy insurance against these other events. And they said, well, but you're not done yet. And he said, do we have a 5th risk? And they said, yes, absolutely. He said, what's the 5th risk? He said, the 5th risk is when you know you have a problem, but you are unwilling or unable to face it and to deal with it. Then that problem only gets worse. And he said, that is what is happening to not just American politics, but to a great measure around the world. And it's
divide and conquer. Yes, this
fascinating discussion. Fascinating discussion.
Jim, everything you said, I see it happening. You know, there are people from other countries, because I read a lot of international media, celebrating and making fun of us. Just the decay from the inside. The great American nation can't even feed or keep power on for their own people. How are we going to interfere and tell others that democracy works? This angers me. This angers me to no end. And this makes me fearful that everyone is watching us and everyone is rooting for our demise for a reason, right? Because we've been the model of you know what I'm trying to say.
We've been the beacon of hope for people around the world. They look up to us. They respect us. They expect us to provide leadership and in many ways to guide them and to protect them.
We have not.
And we are now moving back from that long-held responsibility that we have had since the 1930s, the 1940s, certainly after World War II. I think we need to move aggressively and get that back.
It's a slippery slope. We're declining quickly because of political infighting, because of starting from Tea Party, we've got to. What you said about other countries, this happens perfectly in Taiwan. It's a perfect parallel. Taiwan was a great country until they opened up and let the opposition party come in. And now it's all about how do you brainwash people to pretend that you're doing something? How do you control the media? How do you make sure that everything you do is to look good? But the numbers don't lie. You know, GDP doesn't lie. Your amount of production doesn't lie. You know, the deaths from last week, it doesn't lie. You can say all you want, how good you are. Those things cannot lie. And when a country's leaders do exactly what he said, Taiwan is doing right now. You know, the greatest comparison, our greatest competitor is China. Red China. You know what their advantages is? Because I follow this all the time. You know what they're saying now? I'd rather live in a communist country than a democracy, because at least I know the government will take care of me. I know in the communist government that if the CCP, if one state or province have this kind of issue, the leader from the province all the way to local, they all resign. Some of them get jailed because it is their responsibility. They rather do that. And that makes me feel sad. That makes me feel sad hearing that, because that's not how it was before here.
No, that's actually a terrible consequence. And again, they're taking risks they don't fully understand. I don't blame them for making the conclusion that they do. After Iraq, a lot of people figured out that one of the reasons that Saddam Hussein was so successful is he kept people safe and he kept law and order. Same thing as Marshal Tito did in Yugoslavia. As soon as he died, the place broke apart into disorder. Okay. Now, ultimately, we'll get it all back. But the first thing people want is safety and stability. At any rate, Jimmy, I apologize. I'm going to have to go, so we should probably end it here.
Perfect timing. I had the clock on at the exact 30. Hey, Jim, take care. I hope you and your family are okay, and I appreciate you for talking to our audience. The viewpoint you brought today, we all needed to hear. We need to heal. We need to help. There are a lot of organizations doing work to help. I hope all of us can get through this together because we're Estonians, we're Brazilian, and we've been through so much in the last year. So Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy.
观众，谢谢，谢谢。
Talk later. 谢谢，拜拜。